The homeless veteran spoke in a low, gravelly voice. "Don't move and don't speak." Officer Megan Turner froze in the middle of the snow-choked alley. She had just stepped out of her patrol car when she noticed the man leaning against a frost-covered brick wall. Tall, broad-shouldered, wrapped in a worn navy coat that had weathered far too many winters. At first glance, Kyle Anderson looked like another forgotten soul swallowed by the city, but his deep brown eyes burned with a fierce urgency that cut through the storm. Beside him, Thor, a 5-year-old German shepherd with black and sable fur, gave a low, warning growl, muscles coiled, amber eyes fixed on the darkness behind Megan. Her instincts screamed danger. Her hand hovered over her holster, but something in Kyle's voice made her hesitate. Kyle lifted a trembling, half-frozen hand. "He's in the alley," he rasped. "He followed you from the main road. I saw him waiting." A gust of icy wind swept through the narrow passage, rattling trash bins lined with snow. Megan's pulse kicked hard as she pressed her back against the patrol car, eyes narrowing toward the shifting shadows. Snow turned heavier, muffling the city, tightening the moment like a vice. Between a uniformed officer and a man the world had written off, only one thing was certain. Someone was about to strike. If this story moves you, remember to share it, leave a comment, and subscribe for more powerful moments of courage and second chances. The soldier in Boston's snow winter winds pressed against the narrow streets of Boston, turning every breath into a pale cloud that drifted into the night. Kyle Anderson sat beneath the stone archway of an abandoned storefront, wrapping his worn navy coat tighter across his chest. Once a Navy SEAL, one of the best, he now looked like a ghost of the man he used to be. His body was still cut from years of discipline, broad-shouldered and tall, but the weight of memory sat heavily in the lines across his brow. His beard, kept short out of old habit, was peppered with gray at the jawline. His dark brown eyes, deep-set and intense, still scanned the world the way they had in Afghanistan, though now the threats were smaller, nearer, and somehow more painful to face. Beside him rested Thor, a 5-year-old German shepherd with the build of a trained fighter and the loyalty of a guardian carved from stone. Thor's fur was a thick coat of black and sable, his ears always upright even when he lay curled beside Kyle. His amber eyes reflected every motion on the street. The harness strapped across his muscular chest read, "Service dog, do not pet," though children sometimes tried anyway. Thor never snapped, only shifted closer to Kyle, as if reminding the world this was the only human he truly belonged to. Kyle rubbed Thor's neck gently, fingers lingering longer than he intended. "Easy, buddy," he murmured. It had been months since they had a real home. The VA checks had dried up after paperwork got lost, again. Temporary jobs slipped through his fingers because of his knee injury, the same left knee still stiff from shrapnel. And nights were hardest, when dreams pulled him back to the desert, to the blast that killed his best friend, to the helplessness that he could not shake even now. He sometimes wondered if the city streets knew how to press into a man's soul deeper than any battlefield. Cars passed, splashing slush across the curb. People hurried by in coats and scarves, glancing at Kyle only long enough to pretend they hadn't seen him. He got used to that. Thor didn't. Each time someone stared too long, Thor's muscles tensed. Tonight, something in the air felt off. Kyle sensed it before Thor even lifted his head. The rhythm of footsteps changed, too fast, too purposeful. Kyle straightened, instincts snapping awake. Then he saw her. Officer Megan Turner stepped out of her patrol car at the far end of the street. She was young, early 30s perhaps, with a lean build that moved with quiet confidence. Her hair, a deep chestnut brown, was tucked into a navy knit cap. Her skin was fair, slightly reddened from the cold, and fatigue hung under her blue-green eyes. She wore her thick winter duty coat unzipped just enough for her badge to show, the edges dusted with snowflakes. Even from a distance, Kyle noticed the weary slump in her shoulders, the mark of someone coming off a shift far longer than planned. Megan checked, something on her notepad, then headed toward a narrow alley behind a row of bars. Kyle watched her body language carefully. She was alert, yes, but tired, too tired. And the alley she was walking toward was half lit, half hidden, the kind of place predators choose. Thor's ears shot up. At the far corner, beneath a flickering sign, stood a man Kyle hadn't seen before. He looked to be in his late 30s, average height, wearing a black hooded jacket pulled low over his forehead. His posture screamed one thing: he was waiting, not wandering. His gloved hands were buried too deep in his pockets. His weight shifted forward, the stance of someone preparing for movement rather than avoiding the cold. Kyle felt his chest tighten, a familiar electricity moving through his nerves. "Thor," he whispered. The dog stiffened. Megan turned into the alley, steps cautious but steady. A gust of wind scraped along the brick walls, carrying the crunch of hurried footsteps behind her. Footsteps she hadn't noticed. Kyle heard them. Thor heard them. And the cold that ran through Kyle's spine wasn't from winter. He pushed himself up, knees screaming in protest. Thor rose instantly, head low, body ready, eyes fixed on the alley's entrance. Kyle tried to move faster, but the ice beneath his feet made every step a gamble. He forced himself forward anyway, his mind racing, breath burning. Then, Thor emitted a single bark, not loud, not frantic, short, sharp, a warning. Megan froze, halfway down the alley, hand hovering near her holster, as she glanced back over her shoulder. The alley ahead was masked in shadow. The alley behind held only the echo of that bark, the hiss of steam rising from a manhole cover, and the faint shape of Kyle limping toward her through the curtain of falling snow. But between Megan and the street, the hooded man had already begun to move. Whether Kyle would reach her in time, or whether she would face the danger alone, remained uncertain. The bark that split the darkness, snow whipped through the narrow alley as Officer Megan Turner spun toward the sound behind her. Her boots skidded on the thin sheen of ice, and for a heartbeat she saw nothing but warped shadows and the faint reflection of her own breath. Then a figure burst out from behind a stack of overflowing trash bins. He was taller than she expected, maybe 6 feet, wrapped in a black hooded jacket soaked by the storm. His face was thin, cheeks hollow, stubble patchy across a jaw that clenched with desperate intent. His eyes were jittery and bloodshot, the eyes of a man who had been living on the edge for too long, nervous, feral, and drawn to violence like a spark to gasoline. In his right hand, a folding knife snapped open, the metal catching a sliver of light from the distant street lamp. Megan tried to draw her gun, but the ice beneath her boots betrayed her. Her heel slid, her fingers grazed the grip, and the knife surged toward her. That was when the voice cut through the sold, rough, commanding, like a memory dragged straight from a battlefield. "Stand still," the voice barked. "Don't speak. Move back now." Kyle Anderson moved with a limping but lethal stride, his navy coat flaring behind him as he stepped between Megan and the attacker. His left knee nearly buckled, but years of training pushed through the pain. He angled his body, shoulders squared, eyes locked on the man rushing toward them. Thor streaked forward before Megan fully processed what was happening. The German Shepherd became a blur of black and sable fur, muscles firing with precision. His jaws clamped onto the attacker's wrist, not tearing, not mauling, but pinning with the calculated force of a trained service dog. The man shrieked, knife clattering against the frozen ground. He tried to wrench free, but Thor adjusted his grip, keeping the blade hand immobilized. Kyle seized the moment. He lunged, twisting the attacker's arm behind him with brutal efficiency. The man fought like a cornered animal, kicking and thrashing, but Kyle's forearm braced against his spine, forcing him downward. Pain shot up Kyle's damaged knee, white-hot and merciless. He gritted his teeth, refusing to yield even an inch. Behind them, Megan regained her footing, her pulse hammered, adrenaline sharpening every breath. She pulled her handgun clear at last, stepping to the side to create a clear angle. "Boston PD!" she shouted, voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Don't move!" The attacker bucked wildly. Kyle shifted his weight to keep him pinned, his breath coming out ragged. Thor released the man's wrist only when Kyle ordered, "Out!" in a low tone. The dog retreated a step, hackles raised, chest heaving with controlled fury. The man jerked again. Megan acted first. She swept in, knee pressing the attacker's shoulder, yanking his wrists backward. With one decisive motion, she snapped the handcuffs around him. The metal clicked, echoing through the alley like the closing of a steel door. Silence settled, broken only by the distant approach of sirens. Megan lowered her weapon, her exhale turning white in the air. As she stood, she finally faced the man who had saved her, the homeless veteran, the stranger with storm-worn clothes and battlefield presence. Up close, he looked even more worn than she'd realized. Kyle's beard was trimmed but uneven, his dark hair flattened by snow, his eyes scanning the alley even after the danger was contained. They carried the weight of too many nights awake, too many memories that refused to fade. Beside him, Thor stood guard, tail still as a blade, amber eyes locked on the handcuffed man. "Are you hurt?" Megan asked, her voice softening. Kyle shook his head. Just a scrape. That was a lie. She saw the torn skin across his knuckles, blood mixing with snow, and the limp he tried to mask. The man was holding himself together, as if afraid that falling apart would break something permanently. Backup officers arrived. A pair of patrolmen, one tall and broad with a buzz cut, the other shorter with a tired gaze, took custody of the attacker. Neither paid Kyle more than a brief, dismissive glance. They didn't see what Megan saw. They didn't see the precision, the discipline, the courage. When they left, the alley felt strangely quiet. Megan stepped toward Kyle, offering him a clean medical glove. "Your hand should be covered. You're bleeding." Kyle blinked like he wasn't used to that kind of concern. He accepted the glove slowly. "Thanks," he muttered. Thor nudged his thigh once, as if reminding him they needed to move on. They always moved on. Never stay too long. Kyle touched the dog's head, then inclined his head toward Megan. "Glad you're safe, officer." He turned away, shouldering his worn backpack. His silhouette cut through the falling snow, moving back toward the world of shadows he seemed to belong to. Thor followed, his gait proud and silent. Megan watched them go, two figures disappearing into winter like legends no one bothered to write down. But she did. She would. She couldn't shake the truth. A homeless veteran and his loyal dog had saved her life tonight, and for reasons she couldn't explain, she needed to know who he was beyond the cold and the darkness that wrapped around him. The hidden hero beneath the winter frost, the cold settled deeper into Boston as daylight faded early, leaving the city wrapped in a blanket of steel-blue twilight. For Officer Megan Turner, the echo of that winter night refused to loosen its grip. She replayed the scene again and again, the knife, the bark, the stranger's silhouette stepping between her and death. His voice, rough like gravel dragged across concrete, still clung to her thoughts long after the paperwork was filed and the attacker hauled away. She needed to understand the man who had saved her. And so she began searching. She visited cafes that stayed open past midnight, the kinds with flickering neon signs and baristas too tired to ask questions. She stopped at convenience stores where clerks bundled in hoodies shrugged when she showed Kyle's vague description. She even stepped into the old stone church near Tremont Street, where volunteers stacked crates of canned goods and passed out blankets to the city's forgotten souls. Everywhere she asked, she heard the same thing. "The veteran with the German Shepherd? Yeah, he comes by sometimes." But no one knew where he slept. No one knew anything real, just that he moved like a man who didn't want to be found. It wasn't until her third night searching that she spotted him. A mostly abandoned parking lot on the edge of downtown lay dim beneath a single flickering lamp. Snow piled unevenly against a rusting chain-link fence. And tucked near a concrete pillar, she saw it, a makeshift shelter of tarp and cardboard, held down by bricks and old rope. Kyle Anderson sat inside, coat wrapped tight, his breath drifting in faint clouds. Thor lay curled beside him, head resting on his paws, but eyes alert, glowing amber in the half-light. A stainless steel water bowl sat beside the dog, clean, filled, cared for, evidence of someone holding on to dignity, even when little else remained. Megan approached slowly, her boots crunching on the brittle snow. Thor rose first, his ears pricked, stance steady, tail held low but not aggressive. He assessed her with the calm restraint of a dog trained to read threats before reacting. Megan crouched slightly, letting Thor see her hands, her posture soft. "Hey, Thor," she whispered, careful not to reach out. "Good boy. Just me." The dog glanced at Kyle as if asking permission. Kyle looked up at her with guarded surprise. He seemed tired in a way that went beyond lack of sleep. His face, lean and sharp around the edges, carried a solemn stillness that war veterans often brought home with them. His hair, dark and unkempt beneath his hood, brushed the tops of his brows. The bruise along his knuckles, earned fighting her attacker, had deepened into mottled shades of blue and violet. "What are you doing out here?" he asked. His tone wasn't angry, but it held suspicion born from long nights of strangers approaching for the wrong reasons. Megan held out the cup of hot coffee she brought, the steam curling in the frigid air. "I wanted to thank you properly," she said, "and maybe make sure you're all right." Kyle hesitated before taking it. "You didn't need to come." "I know," she replied. "I came anyway." Thor's posture loosened. Kyle's eyes softened too, just slightly, as if he wasn't used to anyone checking on him without wanting something in return. Over the next few days, Megan found reasons, sometimes flimsy, sometimes genuine, to stop by again. She brought small things, a sandwich, a new pair of gloves, dog biscuits for Thor. Kyle resisted at first, his pride prickling like frostbite, but Megan didn't push. She sat near the shelter, talked in a calm voice, and let him decide when he wanted to speak. Eventually he did. Piece by piece he shared fragments of his past. He explained the injury in his left knee, the blast that took his closest teammate, and the way the world shifted when he came home and nothing felt familiar anymore. He explained losing his job as a security guard when the pain worsened, how one missed rent payment turned into eviction, how the street slowly became the only option left. He never said the words "I gave up," but Megan heard them in the pauses between his sentences. And Thor, she learned, had been trained as a working canine overseas. Kyle had refused to surrender him when discharged, and Thor, in turn, had refused to leave his side. They formed a two-person unit the world didn't recognize but desperately needed. Yet danger was beginning to circle again. The man who attempted to kill Megan wasn't acting alone. Detectives discovered he was tied to a drug ring operating out of the South End. Men who didn't appreciate witnesses, or complications, or vigilantes who interfered with their business. Kyle had tangled with them without realizing it. Now they knew him, and they watched. Late one evening, Megan arrived with a folded blanket under her arm, the kind insulated for harsh winter nights. The parking lot seemed too quiet. No idle chatter from nearby shelters, no buses passing, not even the hum of distant traffic. She spotted two men first. Both stood near Kyle's makeshift tent, too close, too still. One wore a puffy red jacket, his neck covered in tattoos that snaked up toward a half-shaved scalp. The other was tall and lanky with a pointed beard and small, restless eyes. Their postures were casual enough to fool anyone who didn't know how violent men disguised intent. Megan froze behind a row of abandoned shopping carts. Thor blocked the entrance to Kyle's shelter, stance rigid, teeth barely visible beneath his lips. Kyle stood half-turned, trying to defuse the situation, shoulders tense. She stepped forward, hand near her holster. "Is there a problem here?" Both men turned. Their eyes flicked to her badge, then to the dog, then to Kyle. Something dangerous simmered beneath the surface. Not tonight, she thought. Not to him, not again. The warrior's heart in winter, the storm rolled over Boston like a white curtain, sweeping through alleys and burying every sound beneath layers of wind and snow. Streetlights flickered against the rising drifts, and even the hum of traffic was swallowed by the blizzard's relentless pulse. Patrol cars crept along the roads at a crawl, tires slipping against a surface that looked more like frozen glass than pavement. Inside her cruiser, Officer Megan Turner gripped the steering wheel tightly as the radio crackled to life. The voice on the other end trembled with urgency, a mother reporting her young son missing. The boy had vanished somewhere between school and home, his footprints discovered near an abandoned construction site in the northern part of the city. But by the time responders arrived, the storm had swept the trail clean. For a moment, Megan closed her eyes, feeling the panic in the mother's voice echo inside her. She imagined the child, small and frightened, trying to fight the cold he didn't understand. She imagined her own helplessness if she continued searching blindly in this storm. And then she thought of Kyle, of Thor, of the amber gaze that seemed to see even the smallest disturbances in the world. Megan spun the cruiser around, tires carving a shaky arc across the empty road. Snow battered the windshield as she sped toward the deserted parking lot where she knew Kyle sheltered. She found him crouched beside a small charcoal stove, shielded by a broken concrete slab. Thor lay close, soaking in the warmth, his fur glistening with melted flakes. Kyle looked up when Megan approached, his expression instantly sharpening at the fear in her eyes. "What's wrong?" His voice held no hesitation, just readiness, like a switch flipped inside him. "A boy is missing," she said, breath clouding in the frigid air. 8 years old. He hasn't been seen for over an hour. They lost the trail." Kyle didn't waste a second. He reached for his coat, shrugged it on, and checked the straps on Thor's harness. The dog rose immediately, ears pointed, reading the urgency before any words were spoken. "Give me something with the kid's scent," Kyle said. Megan handed him a woolen beanie, the one the frantic mother had pressed into her hands earlier. Thor sniffed it, nostrils flaring as he locked onto the scent. His muscles tensed, tail lifting slightly, a signal that he had what he needed. "Lead," Kyle murmured. Thor lunged into motion, bounding across the snow like a creature built for storms. Kyle followed, moving with a limping but determined stride, and Megan kept pace behind them. The wind clawed at their faces, stinging their skin, erasing their tracks almost as quickly as they made them. They crossed an old freight yard littered with rusting equipment, snow piling on the metal like forgotten letters. Thor sniffed the ground, zigzagged, then pulled hard toward a cluster of derelict storage. Buildings. The buildings were low and rectangular, the kind used decades ago by shipping workers. Now they stood silent, windows broken, graffiti frozen against their walls. Thor stopped outside the largest one. He barked twice, sharp, urgent, decisive. Kyle's jaw clenched. He's in there. The door was jammed with ice, but Kyle threw his shoulder against it. Pain shot through his knee, but he pressed harder, forcing it open with a groan of rusted metal. The darkness inside smelled of cold cement and mold. Then a small sound reached them, shallow breathing, a whimper. Megan rushed forward with her flashlight. The beam landed on a small boy curled behind a stack of crates, his face blue-tinged, his jacket stiff with frost. He looked about 8, with sandy blonde hair plastered to his forehead and eyes wide with fear. "We've got you," Megan said, kneeling beside him. She wrapped him in a thermal blanket from her kit, pulling him gently into her arms. "You're safe now." The boy clutched Thor's neck when the dog lowered his head beside him. The sight made Kyle's throat tighten, not with pain, but with something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Thor's tail swished softly, careful not to disturb the child. Megan radioed for an ambulance while Kyle carried the boy out, holding him as steadily as his aching knee allowed. Snow stung their faces as sirens approached from the distance, red and blue lights flickering through the swirling white. Within an hour, the story spread across the precinct. Reporters caught wind, too. Soon, the tale of a homeless Navy SEAL and his service dog rescuing a missing child in the middle of a blizzard became the headline whispered through corridors and break rooms. And for the first time, people began seeing Kyle not as a shadow on the edge of society, but as someone who had never stopped serving. Officer Sarah Calloway, Megan's supervisor, was the first to insist on speaking with him. Sarah was a woman in her mid-40s, with sharp cheekbones, hazel eyes, and tightly curled black hair pulled into a bun so neat it might have been sculpted. Her posture radiated authority, shaped by 2 decades on the force and the loss of her partner years ago, a tragedy that had carved tuition into her bones. She approached Kyle at the station the next morning, studying him with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. "You're Anderson?" she asked. Kyle straightened instinctively. "Yes, ma'am." Sarah's gaze flicked to Thor, who sat obediently at Kyle's side. "Your dog has better focus than half my rookies." Kyle allowed the faintest smile. "He's been through a lot." Sarah crossed her arms. "Megan seems to think you're worth hearing out." A pause. "She's rarely wrong." With cautious interest, she listened as Kyle recounted the rescue. His voice was calm, crisp, echoing the discipline of years spent following strict protocol. Thor stood, unmoving throughout the entire conversation, as if demonstrating his own resume. Finally, Sarah nodded. "There's a place for someone like you here," she said, "if you want it." After lengthy discussions, the precinct offered Kyle a part-time role, helping train the K-9 unit, advising officers on high-risk approaches, and building trust with homeless veterans who avoided law enforcement. Kyle looked overwhelmed, almost guilty, as though he didn't deserve a second chance. Megan placed a hand on his arm. "You didn't hesitate to help me," she said softly. "Or that boy. Let us help you now." Kyle said nothing at first, then quietly, "Maybe it's time." The last winter of loneliness, snow softened across Boston's rooftops as winter began to loosen its grip, turning from sharp ice to gentle slush. The city felt different now, less hostile, less echoing, and in small ways, so did Kyle Anderson. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't standing outside the precinct doors or watching police cars roll past him. He was part of the rhythm within those walls. His first weeks in the department were cautious ones. Officers eyed him with mixed curiosity and skepticism, unsure how a man who once slept under bridges now walked their hallways with a badge access visitor card and a military posture more disciplined than any recruit. But their doubts faded faster than he expected. Thor helped with that. The German shepherd strode through the precinct with the regal composure of a seasoned officer. His harness gleamed, his ears always alert, and his eyes tracked every sound and movement. New trainees, the kind who still fumbled with paperwork and lost their radios, whispered that Thor was the strictest supervisor in the building. Even veteran officers admitted the dog carried himself like a decorated sergeant. Kyle noticed these moments quietly. The amusement warmed something inside him he didn't often acknowledge. He worked systematically, analyzing training patterns, refining canine drills, and adjusting patrol maps to expose overlooked blind spots. The changes were subtle but effective. Routes became safer, officers felt more confident entering volatile areas, and Thor's demonstrations became the highlight of every new canine class. And Kyle did something else. He listened. When homeless veterans, men with scraggly beards and trembling hands, or older women with hoarse voices and haunted eyes, walked past the station, he approached with respect. Kyle had a rare ability to speak to them without judgment, without pity, with the understanding of someone who had walked the same cold streets. He coaxed them into shelters, de-escalated arguments others could not, and sometimes simply sat with them long enough for their anger to soften. His presence filled a gap the precinct never knew it had. Through it all, Megan stayed close. Their conversations grew longer, stretching across coffee breaks and late-night patrol returns. Megan shared pieces of her past, her parents' move from Vermont, her childhood dream of joining the force, her struggles balancing strength and vulnerability in a profession built on walls. She laughed more around Kyle, her shoulders visibly lighter when he was near. And Kyle, he spoke of colleagues he'd lost, nights he wished he could forget, and dreams he didn't think he deserved. Megan listened without flinching, never turning away from the scars beneath his silence. Thor often inserted himself between them at the station bench, placing his broad head on whichever lap kept the two humans from sitting too close. Megan joked he was jealous. Kyle said he was chaperoning. Either way, Thor's presence brought warmth where winter once lingered. Months passed like that, steady, healing, unhurried. Then came the day everything changed. A representative from a Veterans Support Foundation arrived, a middle-aged woman named Linda McCrae. She had short chestnut hair streaked with silver, warm brown eyes behind simple wire-framed glasses, and a gentle smile that carried both authority and compassion. Linda was small in stature, but moved with a firmness that suggested years assisting people who'd fallen through society's cracks. "Kyle Anderson," she said after shaking his hand, "I hear you've been helping a lot of folks. The precinct talks about you more than they talk about their coffee machine." Kyle flushed slightly. "Just trying to be useful." "You're doing more than that," Linda replied, "and we'd like to help you get back on your feet." With paperwork, Megan helped prepare, and Linda's organization covering initial costs. Kyle qualified for housing assistance. The offer came with no strings attached, only encouragement. Weeks later, Kyle stood in the doorway of a modest apartment on the city's edge. The place was simple: a soft beige carpet, a small kitchenette, a radiator that rattled like an old friend, and a balcony barely wide enough for a chair. But it was his. Megan accompanied him on moving day. She filled the kitchen cabinet with simple groceries and placed a metal water bowl neatly in a corner. Thor trotted inside, sniffing every surface, tail wagging faster with each discovery. When he finally settled onto a new gray dog bed Megan bought, he curled up with a deep, contented sigh, a sound that struck Kyle harder than he expected. For the first time in years, Thor had a home, and so did he. Later that night, Kyle stood in the warm glow of the living room lamp, watching Megan kneel to adjust the dog bed. Snowflakes drifted outside like tiny glowing embers. He felt a knot form in his throat, not of pain, but gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered. Megan looked up, eyes calm and sure. "You saved yourself first," she said gently. "We just helped you see the door." Her words settled into the quiet of the room, making it feel full instead of empty. As winter waned, they walked together, Kyle in his new knit cap, Megan bundled in a thick coat, and Thor trotting between them with a confident sway. Passers-by smiled at the sight of the trio without knowing their story, but they knew, and that was enough. It was the last winter of loneliness for all three of them, replaced now with something sturdier than hope: belonging. In the quiet that followed their long winter, Kyle, Megan, and Thor found something many people spend a lifetime searching for: a place to belong, a hand that does not let go, and a light that does not fade when storms rise. Some would say their meeting was luck. Others might call it coincidence. But those who have walked through sorrow know better. Sometimes God sends help in ways we do not expect. Sometimes a miracle looks like a tired soldier, a loyalty, and a single bark in the night. Sometimes grace comes not as thunder, but as a gentle nudge that leads us back to hope. And in that small apartment, warmed by the glow of a simple lamp, Kyle finally understood something he had forgotten along the way. No one is ever too lost for God to find. No winter is too long for God to end. No heart is too broken for God to heal. As you close this story and return to your own life, your home, your daily troubles, your quiet prayers, I hope you carry this truth with you. We all face our own storms, but we never walk through them alone. There is always a hand ready to lift us, a voice ready to guide us, and a love far greater than anything the world can break. If this story touched you, moved you, or reminded you of someone who might need a little hope today, please share it. Leave a comment, tell us where you're watching from, and join our growing family by subscribing to the channel. May God bless you, protect you, and be the warmth in your coldest nights. And may you never forget that miracles still happen every day, sometimes in the form of a man, a woman, and a faithful dog walking side by side through the snow.